The wind swept across the old cemetery in Virginia, carrying with it the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth. The sky above was gray, a heavy curtain that seemed to press down on the world, as though heaven itself was grieving along with those who came here to remember the dead. At the far edge of the cemetery, a little girl named Emily Carter, no older than 7, sat on the cold ground beside a weathered gravestone. Her small dress, once white, was smudged with dirt. She clutched a crumpled piece of yellow paper in her hand, the ink smeared by her tears. Her sobs echoed faintly among the rows of graves. "Daddy, you live here now," she whispered, pressing her palm against the rough stone. Her voice trembled as she read from the paper, a letter she had written with her shaky handwriting. "Greater than dear Daddy, I miss you. Mommy says you are in heaven, but I can't see heaven. I only see this stone. So I will sit here every day until you come back." She broke down again, clutching the note to her chest. In her other hand, a tiny American flag stuck out of the soil, a reminder that her father, Michael Carter, had died serving his country overseas. Emily didn't understand war. She didn't understand why Daddy had to go so far away only to never come back. All she knew was that Mommy cried at night when she thought Emily was asleep, and that their home felt emptier than it had ever been before. As she wept, a shadow fell across her. She looked up, her tear-filled eyes widening. A man stood a few rows away, dressed in a white suit. He held a bouquet of red roses in his hands, his expression calm but unreadable. Emily didn't recognize him, yet something about his presence made her heart skip. He wasn't like the other visitors who came to grieve and leave. He stood there, watching. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Finally, Emily sniffled and wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Why are you standing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man tilted his head slightly. His eyes, dark and deep, flicked toward the gravestone beside her. "Because I'm waiting," he said softly. Emily frowned. "Waiting for who?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer and carefully placed the bouquet on another grave. Emily followed his movement with curious eyes, noticing that the grave he chose had no flowers, no sign that anyone had visited it for years. "Was that your daddy?" Emily asked cautiously. The man smiled faintly, but it wasn't the smile of joy. It was a smile filled with sorrow. "No," he said, "but sometimes, people forget the ones who are buried here. I don't like them to be alone." Emily's lip trembled again as fresh tears formed. She pressed her cheek against her father's gravestone. "My daddy's not alone. I'm here with him." The man crouched down, his white suit brushing against the wet grass. His gaze softened as he studied her fragile form. "I can see that," he whispered. "You must love him very much." "I do," Emily cried. "He was the best daddy. He promised he'd come back, but he didn't. Mommy says he's watching me from heaven. But," her voice cracked, "but I can't see him. Why can't I see him?" The man hesitated. His eyes flickered, as though memories long buried stirred within him. Finally, he said, "Sometimes love is stronger than distance. Stronger than death. Maybe, if you look closely enough, you'll feel him here." Emily sniffled again. "Do you think he knows I'm here?" "Yes," the man said firmly. "He knows." For reasons she couldn't explain, Emily believed him. There was something in his voice, a weight, a certainty that made her heart ache yet feel strangely comforted. She stared at him curiously. "What's your name?" The man paused. "David," he said after a moment. "Are you sad, too, Mr. David?" she asked innocently. His jaw tightened, his eyes glistening as though he carried a mountain of grief that no child could ever understand. "Yes," he whispered. "I've been sad for a very long time." Emily tilted her head. "Why?" David didn't answer. Instead, he slowly stood, brushing the dirt from his suit. He looked down at her with a kind but distant expression. "You should go home now," he said gently. "It's getting late." But Emily shook her head stubbornly. "No, I promised Daddy I'd stay. If I leave, what if he wakes up and I'm not here?" David's face paled. For a brief moment, his calm mask cracked, revealing something raw beneath the surface. He turned his gaze to the gravestone and whispered so softly that Emily almost didn't hear. "Greater than, he's not the one who will wake up. That night, when Emily's mother, Sarah Carter, came to take her home, she noticed the fresh roses on the forgotten grave nearby. She looked around for the man who might have left them, but the cemetery was empty. Emily clung to her mother's hand, still holding the crumpled letter. As they walked away, she looked over her shoulder. Somewhere deep inside her, she felt that the man in white hadn't really left. He was still watching, waiting, and somehow, she knew this wasn't the last time she'd see him. The following week, the cemetery once again echoed with the sound of a child's footsteps. Emily Carter, dressed in her faded pink sweater, clutched another piece of paper in her hand. The autumn air had grown colder, but she didn't care. She had promised her father she'd keep coming back. She knelt beside the grave, laying down her letter and a single daisy she had plucked from the side of the road. "Hi, Daddy," she whispered. "I'm here again. Mommy says I should talk to you, even if you can't answer." She swallowed hard. "But maybe you can. Maybe you're listening right now." Her small voice carried into the silence of the graveyard. As she wiped away a tear, she noticed something unusual. The grave of the forgotten man, the one David had visited last week, now had another fresh bouquet of roses lying across it. Her heart jumped. She looked around, and sure enough, a tall figure in a white suit stood beneath a tree at the edge of the cemetery. His hands were folded in front of him, his posture straight, almost like a soldier standing at attention. Emily scrambled to her feet and ran to him. "Mr. David," she cried. He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes softening at the sight of her. "Hello, Emily," he said in his calm, steady voice. "You came back," she said with a smile, though her cheeks were streaked with tears. "I thought maybe you wouldn't." "I told you," he replied, kneeling down so his eyes were level with hers. "I don't like the dead to be alone." Emily frowned. "But you're not dead." David's smile flickered, sad and fleeting. "Aren't I?" he asked quietly. Emily tilted her head in confusion. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, a voice called out. "Emily." Sarah Carter approached quickly, her face flushed with worry. She had told her daughter not to run off, especially not in a graveyard, but Emily never listened when it came to visiting her father. Sarah froze when she saw David. For a long, tense moment, she stared at him as though she had seen a ghost. "Who are you?" she demanded, clutching Emily protectively. David stood, his expression composed. "Just someone who remembers," he said softly. Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Remembers what?" He looked at her with a heaviness in his gaze. "Michael Carter. Your husband. He saved my life." Sarah's breath caught. You knew him." David nodded slowly. "More than knew him. We fought side by side." Emily's eyes widened. She tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, did you hear? He knew Daddy." Sarah's lips trembled. She hadn't spoken to anyone from Michael's unit since the funeral. She hadn't wanted to reopen wounds that barely began to heal. But something about this man stirred her deeply, his manner, his presence, his sorrow that mirrored her own. "Tell me," she whispered. "Tell me what happened." David lowered his gaze. "Not here," he said. "But if you want to know the truth, I can show you." That evening, Sarah sat across from David at the small kitchen table of their modest Virginia home. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch, clutching her father's old photo album. The clock ticked softly in the background as Sarah stared at David, her hands trembling around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. "Michael wrote me letters," she said quietly. "But they stopped 2 weeks before she swallowed hard. Before they told me he was gone. They said it was quick. An ambush. That he didn't suffer." David's eyes darkened. He shook his head slowly. "That's not the truth." Sarah's chest tightened. "Then tell me." David leaned forward, his voice low, steady, but heavy with pain. "We were deployed in Kandahar. Michael and I were assigned to the same patrol. He was always fearless. Not careless, but brave in a way that made the rest of us feel stronger just by following him." Sarah's eyes welled up. That was her husband. Always carrying others, always standing tall. "One night," David continued, "we walked into an ambush. Gunfire everywhere. I was hit first. I would have died there, in the dirt, if it weren't for Michael. He dragged me behind cover, even as bullets tore through the air. He didn't stop. He wouldn't leave me." David's voice cracked slightly, though he quickly steadied it. "He kept firing back, giving me time. But then," he closed his eyes. "A grenade landed nearby. He had a choice, to save himself or shield me. And he chose me." Sarah gasped, her hand covering her mouth. David opened his eyes, glistening with tears. "He threw himself over me. Took the full force of it. When I crawled out, he was already gone." His last words, David paused, his throat tightening. Tell Sarah and Emily I love them. The silence in the room was unbearable. Sarah's tears streamed freely now, her body trembling as she tried to breathe. David's hands clenched into fists on the table. I tried to tell the army what happened, but they wrote the report their way. Easier for the families, they said. Cleaner. But I couldn't live with that lie. Not when he gave his life for mine. Sarah looked at him through her tears. Why now? Why come here after all this time? David's voice dropped to a whisper. Because I see him every time I close my eyes. I hear his voice. I feel the weight of what he did. And when I saw you and Emily at his grave, his voice cracked again. I couldn't stay away. Sarah's heart ached. She wanted to hate him for carrying this truth so long, but she couldn't. He wasn't just another soldier. He was living proof of Michael's sacrifice. At that moment, Emily stirred on the couch. She blinked sleepily and sat up, rubbing her eyes. Mommy, she asked softly, was Daddy really a hero? Sarah's lips trembled. She glanced at David, then back at her daughter. Yes, sweetheart, she whispered. He was the bravest man I ever knew. Emily smiled faintly, though tears glistened in her eyes. She walked over to David and climbed onto his lap without hesitation. Then you're special too, she said simply. Because Daddy saved you. David froze, his chest heaving as emotion threatened to overwhelm him. Slowly, he wrapped his arms around the little girl, holding her as though she were the most fragile, precious thing in the world. I don't deserve that, he whispered, his voice breaking. Emily shook her head stubbornly. Yes, you do. Daddy wanted you to live. So you have to live. For him. For us. David closed his eyes, a single tear rolling down his cheek. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of guilt on his shoulders seemed just a little lighter. In the months that followed, David became a quiet but steady presence in their lives. He visited the cemetery with Emily, told her stories about her father's bravery, and even helped Sarah repair the broken fence in their backyard. Neighbors whispered, wondering who the man in white was. But Sarah knew the truth. He wasn't a replacement for Michael, nor would he ever be. He was the living piece of Michael's legacy, a reminder of the life that had been given so another could go on. One chilly spring morning, Emily placed another letter at her father's grave. This one was different. Greater than Dear Daddy, I still miss you every day. But now I know you didn't leave me. You're here in my heart. And you sent Mr. David to us, so we wouldn't be alone. Thank you for being my hero. I love you forever. She placed the letter down gently, then turned to David, who stood quietly behind her. Do you think he heard me? She asked. David's eyes glistened as he nodded. Yes, he hears every word. Emily smiled through her tears and took his hand. Together, they stood in silence, the wind carrying the scent of fresh roses through the cemetery. And for the first time since Michael Carter's death, the graveyard no longer felt like a place of only sorrow. It felt like a place of love. Because heroes never truly die. They live on in the lives they touched.